What's up, cool people? I'm Matt Conroy, and I've actually had a particular Bible verse passage thing on my mind lately, so this is going to be kind of focused on that and, situations where it seems relevant. So I think what I'm going to do is actually read the passage first and then kind of backtrack and get into why I'm talking about it and then extrapolate and put more of my thoughts in there. The verses I'm going to be reading from are in Luke chapter 6. And, I'm thinking this is from part of the Sermon on the Mount because the verses just before this look real similar to some of my favorite verses in Matthew chapter 7. So I'm thinking Sermon on the Mount might be why there's that similarity in both Gospels. But correct me if I'm wrong on that. Anyway, so Luke chapter 6, I'll be reading verses 43 through 45. I'll mention what I want to emphasize when I get to it. So, if you really must know, I'm reading this from the NRSV, making maybe just some slight alterations as I'm reading it from the exact text in there. But anyway, so starting in verse 43, it says, and this is Jesus speaking here, no good tree bears bad fruit, nor again does a bad tree bear good fruit, for each tree is known by its fruit. Figs are not gathered from thorns, nor are grapes picked from a bramble bush. The good person out of the good treasure of the heart produces good, and the evil person out of evil treasure produces evil. For it is out of the abundance of the heart that the mouth speaks. And that right there, that last little sentence or half a sentence, because there's a semicolon in this one, that's where I really want to focus on this. For it is out of the abundance of the heart that the mouth speaks. And I realize this is talking specifically about, good and evil, or almost kind of generally about good and evil. I mean, those are the words that are specifically used here is what I meant. But those are kind of broad ideas, and I think I'm going to try and get a little bit more specific and nuanced with this. So here's where I backtrack and go to what prompted this. There was a bit of this that came up in, some recent sermons I've heard and stuff like that. But the primary trigger of this verse and what prompted me to talk about it was basically an experience that I had at work. And so there's another employee there. He works in a different department, but he just, I don't know. I had a couple interactions with him, and just the way that he came off at first, for sure, was very just think of kind of crotchety old man. And that's pretty much the vibe I was getting. The way he spoke was just kind of grumpy sounding, and the things that he said were rather grumpy sounding, like he was irritated, either with me or just with the general situation or whatever it was. But he just sounded like a cranky old dude. And, so that was kind of my first experience with this guy. And I was like, okay. Maybe he was just, real frustrated with whatever's been going on. Fine, whatever. But at least that was my initial thought. But after a little bit of that, long enough for it to make me start feeling a bit uncomfortable, and like I really kind of didn't want to talk with this dude too much more if I didn't have to. Then he kind of like backtracks and is like, I'm just messing with you, or something to that effect. And he did a very similar thing, like not even a week later, I don't think. Different situation. He was actually like taking an order that we had prepped and were dispensing and whatever, and he kind of had the same general attitude at first. He came off crotchety old man. He's like, oh wow, you're really gonna put those items in that way? Really, you're just gonna put the bread on top so it could just fall over and get crushed later? That was almost word for word something he said in that interaction. And like, but again, after a couple minutes of acting like that, he's like, oh, come on, I'm just messing with you, sort of thing. And like, literally this verse out of Luke chapter 6 was what came to mind, especially the last part. For it is out of the abundance of the heart that the mouth speaks. And I kind of wondered about this dude. And like, he keeps saying that, oh, he's just messing with me, he's just kidding, or whatever. But if that's like your initial way of interacting with people, that crotchety old man kind of vibe, that isn't something that, like, I feel like there's some truth to that somewhere in him. Like he said he was just messing around, but I feel like there's actually something inside him that is that crotchety old man. Whether it's, again, maybe just, general annoyance or frustration with certain things, whatever it happens to be, like, it's really rare, possibly even non-existent, that we say things that we do not mean at all. I mean, there are some certain situations where, like, you're literally acting, or you're just kind of in a situation where it's putting on an act or something like that. Like, there are some really rare exceptions to where, you say something that you absolutely do not put any stake in, that you think is just completely untrue. But the majority of the time, even if, like, we're not necessarily trying to be mean, or, we don't really want to hurt anyone's feelings, there's still, I think, somewhere deep inside us, somewhere in the back of our minds, there's some truth to what we say, even just kind of, even if we're saying it as sort of, joking around. And I think this is something I've seen a lot of with the students I worked with at my former job, where there were a lot of these just like kind of little just jabs taken, whether in the heat of a moment or as a, just joking, messing around kind of thing. But like, I'm pretty sure there, like, anytime I could think of, if we were to really kind of test these students, the boys in particular, because they're the ones I actually interacted with most of the time, if we were to really test these boys on, these words and like really kind of have them sit down and think about, what prompted them to say those things, there was probably something somewhere inside them that actually believed what they were saying, whether or not they actually meant to, hurt anyone's feelings. And I think that's kind of that general idea of the, oh, I'm just joking sort of thing, and pretending that makes it okay is something we need to watch out for in our culture. Like, if I didn't talk about this before, I'm going to talk about it now. Like, a lot of the more recent kind of kids, tweens, whatever, basically Nick and Disney Channel shows, a lot of those in recent years seem to have just a tremendous number of these situations where it's like something completely ridiculous, possibly dangerous and harmful. Like, a lot of these situations come up that, there could be some, if not physical damage, at least emotional, or like, something that could damage relationships between some people. Like, situations come up like that, and, the characters will do these kinds of things as a joke or whatever it is, and they'll, at the end, just try and, like, apologize or say they didn't mean it or whatever, and somehow, in the show, it always ends up being miraculously okay, as long as they're, sorry for it and they apologize, and they, like, that's not really how real life works. Yeah, sometimes it'll still be okay as long as, people know you and they trust you and they think that you're actually sincere in your apology, but even then, it's not always going to make it right. So I think that's something we need to kind of watch out for in our culture. And I think it's something that we ourselves need to check and make sure that we're not guilty of so much. I mean, look, so part of the reason this is a problem is something I actually learned back at that leadership conference I was at not too long ago. There was talk of a certain part of the brain, I think it was the amygdala or whatever, that, triggers the fight or flight response within us. That's also the same part of the brain that causes us to kind of just lash out for whatever reason. But, like, the reason this whole, like, it's just a prank, bro, joking, kind of cut down situation, part of the reason that's a problem is because those, even though they might be little things, those stack up in our minds. And eventually, it, if we don't have some other experiences to kind of balance it out, eventually that'll just kind of boil over, so to speak, and cause that whole lashing out thing that we do sometimes. And those are the moments where the real, relational harm can happen. But ultimately, I mean, yeah, those are the moments where it gets most heated and it's most obvious that there's a problem, but really, that wasn't the cause of the problem. That wasn't the root issue. The root issue was all those just little digs, those small cut downs that just piled up over time that really caused the whole lashing out response. I've seen this happen multiple times with the boys that I worked with. And like, yeah, it's difficult and it's annoying to try and cut that off. It's annoying to them when you try and cut that off and they're so used to it. And it's difficult to really, like, you know, kind of keep that eagle eye vision and be on the lookout for those little moments. But boy, are they there, like, all the time in our current culture. So that was really the broader picture thing that brought me to this verse and made me want to talk about it. Because, again, it is out of the abundance of the heart that the mouth speaks. There is, again, hardly ever a moment where we say something we absolutely do not mean to any extent. Because if we didn't mean it and we didn't think that it was true, why would we say it at all? Why would it even come to our minds? I mean, unless it's just completely an act. Which, you know, if that's your way of operating in life, that you're, you know, just kind of putting on a facade and acting a part basically all the time, then there's some other issues you got going on. I'm not here to talk about that right now. So, yeah, like, that's kind of the broader idea that I had with this. Kind of the main point is, I think we really need to watch out and be aware of the things that we say, how they can affect other people. And yeah, we might know our own intentions behind them, but we also need to watch out for how it can come across to other people. Because the crotchety old dude might not have really meant to, you know, offend me, bother me, cut me down, whatever you want to call it. But, like, that's how he came across at first. And, like, the fact that he just kind of backtracked and was like, oh, I'm just messing with you, that didn't necessarily make the first part okay. I mean, like, I'm not saying necessarily that this is always going to cause irreparable damage to relationships or whatever, because, you know, as long as we understand that we're human and we're flawed and we mess up and we do things that we, you know, don't necessarily mean to, and, you know, we give a chance for redemption and, you know, reparation of the relationship, like, I'm never going to say that it's, you know, completely a lost cause because of this, but it's something that can very easily cause some damage in relationships. I mean, to use a quote that I just saw, and I don't know where it initially came from, but it sounded just perfect for this. The quote went something like, it takes much longer to grow a tree than it does to cut it down. And in this context, it essentially and I think this is actually the general situation that it was meant to be applied to, was that, like, it takes a lot more time and effort to build a solid, trusting relationship than it does to just completely wreck it, topple it over, and, figuratively speaking, cut it down. I mean, I forget where it is, but I'm pretty sure there's a verse somewhere in James that mentions, you know, the power of the tongue, so to speak, and how it's, like, how it can be a fire that causes so much damage despite being such a small thing. So, yeah, I'm sure there are other verses throughout Scripture that, you know, mention the damage that the tongue can do. this is the verse that came to mind first and foremost, and kind of that's the broader idea that I wanted to get across, while also being a little more nuanced than just like, hey, you'll say good things if your heart's good, and you'll say bad things if your heart's bad. Like, there's a whole lot more nuanced and detailed situations that still applies to. Like, you know, if your heart is just annoyed or frustrated, you're probably going to say things in a annoyed or frustrated tone. Like, that's just how we're wired. So, the thing is, though, the work that we can do to sort of counteract this is to just sort of check our own thoughts, our hearts, our general attitudes before we speak. And this is another reason why it says in Scripture to be slow. Well, it says be slow to anger, but we also need to be slow to speak, especially out of anger. So, yeah, anyway, that's the overall thought that I had. Just the common phrase goes, check yourself before you wreck yourself, but I think it's even more relevant to say, check yourself before you wreck your relationships with other people. So, anyway, that's kind of all I have to say on this matter in this time around. So, if you have any thoughts related to this, other verses you want to contribute, or things you'd like me to talk about, biblical or otherwise, leave a comment down below. And then, the usual stuff to follow my channel and interact and all that good stuff. Like and share the video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel and click the bell to get updates when I post new stuff. Look down in the description for other social media info. So yeah, that pretty much covers it for this time. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you for the next one. But until then, stay cool, people.